Welcome back to part 2 of the Black History Month special on Teach Me About Critical Race Theory with Dr. Utz McKnight. I hope that you genuinely enjoy the rest of this episode and learn something new along with myself. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of this episode.
Oh, don't teach about Black people. Right, like this,
Which
right?
is what it seems like it's happening right now.
Yeah. So, but you could say like this, and I say this to my students, and I want to say it to you too in this. You realize that part of this messaging is trying to deny one very true fact. America was built by Black people.
Yeah,
It was.
literally and
It really
figuratively.
was. So therefore, part of this is trying to erase that, right?
Yeah,
It's like it's part of the thing. When Obama was elected, people would talk to me down here in Alabama, just like where you are, and they would say, "Don't think you're anybody just because you got a Black president." And I'm like, I think of myself as somebody, regardless of whether Obama is president or not,
yeah,
like this, because I know how much my daddy struggled to be able to put me through school, right? And if it wasn't my daddy, I know my granddaddy and grandmama did it.
yeah,
Like this, like I know my grandma, and I know how much with her gullah speak, like all this type of stuff where she was just struggling cleaning up, in an old folks home where it's all white patients, right? Like this. I mean, she died, right? Working as the help,
yeah,
right? And I know how I would feel if I was working like that, because I can pay attention to what my grandmother did, right? And
yeah,
imagine, wait, my great grandparents and my great, like, pure Jim Crow, all the way back, right, into slavery. How much did our labor create the society that represents my progress?
yeah.
I'm just saying. I know I don't want to be too cheesy about it, but
I know
it's
what you
just
mean.
good.
Yeah,
It's good to. This is the way to talk about critical race theory. Is that critical race theory is an attempt to say, let's ban some books, let's not have, but it's based on a very, very facile, superficial way of looking about what counts for progress. Because if you're a conservative in the United States, remember, guess what? You've benefited from this too, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So you are actually shooting yourself in the foot too, right? Like, it's not a matter of can we go back. It's that people were very unhappy with being wealthy and white in Jim Crow South. Not everybody's sitting there like it, what would it be like to have to police Black people all the time on the street?
yeah,
What kind of person would you have to be? There are plenty of stories. I mean, you may have read some of them by famous white authors in the United States about the sort of trauma. Remember Huck Finn? I'm just saying, like, the sort of trauma that was occasioned by racial inequality and
yeah,
difference all the way through American history, right? So it's kind of erasing the possibilities for all of us, right? Now, I hope this is sufficient to talk this way. I keep talking forever, you
I
know.
know, yeah. This is good.
No, but I think, you know, because I'm also giving you a sense of the type of work, the difficulty of the work. Those of us, Cornell West and Tommy Shelby up at Harvard, Bob Gooding Williams at Columbia, a whole bunch of people. Let's say Imani Perry at Princeton, Darlene Clark Hine, et cetera, et cetera. Like, Daphne Brooks at Yale. All these people who work on variations of this idea of, so let's account for what race does, such that we can try and figure out how to improve how human beings interact
Yeah.
in our measure of equality. So it becomes very complicated, right? It's almost like you science people. No, it
Yeah, it's
almost
like
is.
you ask a question, try and find the answer, and then you realize
Yeah,
that there's so many more things that go into it, and then you got to ask another question.
yeah,
It's
that's
just,
right. And it
yeah,
is kind of like chemistry and biology and all that, right? It is.
hmm,
But I think that's one of the great joys of being an academic, right? Um, and before we could be in the academy in large numbers, of course, we had the HBCUs, but before the HBCUs, people had to ask these questions without the benefit of all those institutional things, right?
yeah,
And Black life, what amazes me as I've done research, is how much of Black life has been erased from, let's say, the 1810 teens, 20s, 30s, where we had a thriving free Black print culture, right? Salons where people would talk about these ideas, just like we're doing right now. This
Yeah.
is like the 1820s. We just have technology, right? But 1820s, that should blow your mind. 200 years ago, Black people were talking about these very things in different frame, but in Philadelphia, Boston, right, Baltimore, right, which of course had free and slave, all this. Like there were plenty of people who would sit there in an integrated community or all Black and would talk about, well, did you read the latest thing, blah, 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 latest speech like this? We have always been this way, and so it means that you shouldn't try and diminish Black life to
Yeah.
say that this is a new thing for us. In
Because it's
fact,
not.
it is not. Black people have always been as intelligent as white folk. We have always, if you give us a pen, we will write. If you give us a lab, we will experiment, right? Like this.
Yeah.
It is not, so I'm not, I think it's a good thing, but I'm not so much a fan of this kind of like, here's a famous Black person who did X, because I'm like, no, there were lots of, like, we've always been this way.
Yeah.
We've always been this way. Like, there is no, remember, Black people were all over the place, right? So, like, just be confident.
Always. How do you believe that the stories that you were mentioning in the beginning, and honestly through the entire thing, how do you believe that they can better be articulated, distributed, and told to make them more understood by society as a whole?
I think there's an argument that says that we're always doing that. Like when you see, let's say, a Lovecraft Country, Moonlight, James Bond, Marvel movies.
Yeah.
I like Black Panther, let's say, something like this. We're telling different variations of stories. Right? They work. The joke is, of course, they work because they have common themes that speak to our life, right?
Yeah.
So they're intimately tied in with our life. Like you see a love story on screen, and you're like, dang, right? That's like my life, like this.
Like you watch Queen and Slim, and then you get that
like
feeling.
Queen and Slim, exactly. And everybody, at least you and I, but let's not joke about it. Everybody can relate to him holding her on that runway.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, what? Like, after all this, like, well, what am I supposed to do? The fatalism of a Black life.
Yeah.
If we stick to a very narrow narrative, which is what Queen and Slim is actually talking about too. If we stay within a particular confines, everybody ends up dead in the end, right?
Yeah.
Black people do, right? So we got to skip outside that. That's what Queen and Slim is trying. Anyway, this is my way of showing that, we always have those narratives. It's one of the things like Ava DuVernay and others, right? The producers, the directors. What I like is and people call it this way, film is the world imagined, right? So it allows us to imagine new things, right? But it's just like reading a fiction text or a fantasy text, science fiction text, right? Or detective novel, right? And, I would actually challenge you. I know you see it this way, but I want to make sure it's said. It is exactly like your experiment, right? In chemistry or biology, right?
Yeah.
Actually, you're curious. Your curiosity allows for it. So that technology, science is also part of that process, right?
Yeah.
So you are, and I know it's kind of cheesy, like Carl Sagan, like this, Einstein, like this. It is no, but it's kind of cheesy because they make it cheesy because they were trying to sell, they say, these type of people. But really, it's actually true that we're constantly telling ourselves stories. So what I would do is like, how good are you at telling a story?
Yeah.
How good are you at crafting it? There's a lot of stuff on this idea of, okay, so you do a scientific convention, you actually have, let me just say, you have actually cured lung cancer of a certain type. But because you don't have a story that makes an interpretation that allows it to make sense, it never gets off the ground.
It doesn't. Yeah.
It's just a bunch of, you can see it this way. It's just data on a sheet because you didn't do the right interpretation. You weren't thinking about it the correct way. So there are a lot of inventions, right, that and discoveries that are like, oh, we were looking at it this way, but now we realized. And so like the COVID vaccine, that's actually a story like that, right? Where people were doing this type of work, the mRNA stuff, right? They were doing this type of work, and then they're like, whoa, wait.
Then you had to pivot. Yeah.
And they had to pivot, right? So I think that's part of the human creative genius. I mean, it's what makes us human beings.
Yeah.
Is that creativity. Oh yeah. Like that's why it means that here I am, a political theorist, right? And you're a scientist. And you could see then the value for me in talking to the young brother who's a scientist, right? And other people, but also how we're actually connected.
Yeah.
Because we're telling stories one complete, we're kind of together. It sounds cheesy, but it's actually what motivates us to do what we do. Like
what we do.
You're looking for a particular type of story ending, right? For projects, you're literally doing that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm doing the same thing.
It's really commendable. Oh yes, for sure. And you explained it all beautifully too.
And I think as a younger person, you don't yet realize. I mean, I'm not going to critique you. You have to be careful how much of this sort of drive toward inferiority as a Black person is inundated upon you all the time and internalized.
Yeah.
And if you see, like the way I was just talking, what you need to do, I'm not that, right? But what you need to do is recognize there are incredible geniuses around you who are Black.
Yeah.
In such a way that you can go ahead and accept your own genius. Like when I say it that way, you're like, I'm not a genius. like this. But and that may or may not be, that's beside the point, right? The idea is, are we able as Black people to create a story where we begin to accept our contributions to life?
Yeah.
Or is it always about our availability to the police brutalizing force of terror, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to be like Arbery, run through the streets by 2-3 white random neighbors, right?
Yeah.
And killed? Is that the story that we want to focus on? I think that a lot of people want us to focus on that.
Yeah.
It's kind of a distraction. It's not a distraction for me, but it's a distraction in part, not completely, for you as a scientist.
Yeah.
Because you have a project like this, now you can still pay attention to it. We can talk about it like critical race theory.
Yeah.
Right, like this. But I kind of say like this: some people are kind of built intellectually and emotionally to do certain types of labor. Some people, for example, do prison reform and abolitionism.
Yeah.
Prison abolitionism. Because of my own personal approach toward prisons, for me, it's because of my cousins and everybody who experienced prison. I find it very, very difficult to do prison work. It's not like I haven't done it, right? But I find it very difficult. I found that there were some people who could do it night and day, 24/7, and they're just like,
they got to keep on going for it.
Yeah, and I'm like sitting there like, oh, this is terrible. I can't do this. I can't go to work today, right? Like this, right? So everybody has something that they find that gives them life, like all the flowers to them, right?
Yeah.
And so for you as a young person, what you're trying to do is find what that is. You're literally trying, you're trying to build it, right? And so everybody affirms that, right? For me, who's a little bit older, right? I'm like, I know I thrive on race justice work, the theories of it. Like I love, like if you parse out different concepts and stuff, all of a sudden I start paying attention. Like this. And the rest of the audience, let's say the chemists and the biologists, are like, what is he talking? Like, what?
Yeah.
Like this, right? So what you do is you find your passion, and therefore you kind of represent Black life.
Yeah. And
it's really hard to understand for a lot of people how diverse we really are, all of us as human beings, right?
Yeah.
But now for me, I got friends who are top scientists, Black people, top scientists. Of course I got white friends, like all these people who are like this, but top scientists. And then I've got, people who are incredible with languages, right? Black people who speak 10 languages and more, like they just pick it up like, and so it's not like a special thing, right? Like this, it's what they do, right? And then I have, Black friends of mine who are very successful, like patent attorneys and, or in politics,
Yeah.
right? Like I admire, let's say, Michelle Obama, right? I admire her for getting her law degree, doing her practice, be, living her life as a partner to Barack Obama through all the different things, negotiating all the politics and everything like that. But that's a different person than Barack Obama, right?
Yeah.
And that's a different person than myself. They're only a few years older than me, right? And so I look at them and I can measure myself just like you measure yourself with your peers, right?
Yeah.
I can measure myself. I don't feel like a failure. I had different choices. Now, I'm not saying I could ever be president or I could be the partner of the president. You see what I'm saying? I'm not doing that. Kamala Harris is she's part of her life was in Oakland, which is where I'm from, right?
Yeah.
And she is the same age, same age. Like, but I can measure myself there and say, and I'm not talking about work success. It's the idea that just having survived and trying to do our best, right? With what the kind of things that we bring to the world and our circumstance. Most of the time, like with Kamala and Barack and Michelle, you can see that a lot of it is luck. So we do our best to keep Jeremiah and his friends out of harm's way, right? But it's also luck because you can be on the wrong street at the wrong time, right?
Yep. You never know what could happen.
Yeah, but it means that I don't take myself more seriously than that. I don't think I built this, right? Like in sense, even though I'm not a politician, it's not just a village. It took all these people who I don't even know.
Yeah.
Like that. So it's just important to try and figure out what that means for you, because you still got to have pride in your intellect and ability as a person. Like Jeremiah is a special, it is okay to be a special individual who's a genius in science.
Trying to be.
It's okay. Well, you know what I'm saying? No, but it's important that you can say that.
Yeah.
It's important that you can feel, and it's important that you feel as a young Black man that it's okay to be that way, because there's a lot of stuff that says we're not supposed to be that way. But me and other people will look at you and go like, yeah, that you seem familiar to me. Right? Like, and that's hundreds of years, right? That's all the way back into the continent. People go like, yeah, it's just intellect. I mean, like, what do you think? We're not smart? I mean, we're smarter than you. Or not. Like, we're just different people, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. That was like a really good answer.
Okay.
But yeah,
I just want to be affirming, because this is a great idea to do this teach. I mean, it's a great idea.
I try my best. But thank you so much for joining me on this first episode of Teach Me, especially during Black History Month. This will be a special 2-part episode. But also thank you for being a great mentor and dedicating your life to the advancement of Black people. Like, genuinely, it's really like admirable and special to be able to have the capacity and will and ability to do all the work that you do. So yeah, shout out to you.
It's extremely easy. Thank you for saying that, but it's extremely easy.
And that's what
I'm just following my
that's the type of thing. Yep. And that's like, that's kind of relates to what you were saying before. Everybody has a different, it's easier for different people to do different things as long as you're doing what makes you happy, what you feel like you should be doing. Then,
and I find it's hard, but you have to do it where you don't judge people who have different values. Like, you really don't. Like, I'm just like, okay,
yeah,
as long as you're reasonably happy, we're good. As long as you don't tell me I can't do what I want to do, you know what I'm saying? Then, like, now I sound like some sort of libertarian or something, Anyway, you enjoy yourself. Thank you for this.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me as well.